The dark night of the soul is one of those phrases that feels both poetic and terrifying at once. It sounds like something ancient and mystical, but what it really refers to is a state of profound transformation. It's a collapse of everything you thought you were, a dismantling of the ego, of the stories you tell yourself, of the illusions you live inside without realizing it. Most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid it. Yet, for those who pass through it, it becomes the greatest turning point of their existence. The term itself originates from Saint John of the Cross, a 16th century Spanish mystic who used it to describe a stage of spiritual purification, a period when the soul feels utterly abandoned by God. For Saint John, the dark night wasn't a punishment. It was a process through which the soul sheds everything that prevents it from union with the divine. He wrote, "In order to arrive at the knowledge you have not, you must go by a way in which you know not." It's a haunting truth. The only way to awaken is to lose everything that keeps you asleep. Modern psychology eventually found its own language for this same phenomenon. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who bridged psychology and mysticism, saw the dark night as a psychological and spiritual necessity. He didn't use that exact phrase, but his concept of individuation, the process through which a person becomes whole by integrating their unconscious, mirrors it precisely. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul. This is the paradox. The dark night feels like death, and in a way, it is. It's the death of false identity. It's the end of who you thought you were and the beginning of who you really are. But because the ego fears annihilation, it interprets this process as suffering, loss, depression, or crisis. Yet, if you can endure it, if you don't run, something incredible happens. You begin to discover a deeper dimension of yourself that has nothing to do with your job, your past, your relationships, or even your beliefs. You start to find what mystics call your true nature. The first thing most people experience in the dark night of the soul is the collapse of meaning. Things that once gave you purpose suddenly feel empty. The career you worked so hard to build doesn't fulfill you. The relationships you relied on for validation begin to fall apart. Even the spiritual practices that once inspired you feel hollow. You may start to ask questions you never dared to ask before. Why am I here? What's the point of all this? Who am I really? And for a while, you don't get answers. The universe goes silent. You look for God or purpose, and all you find is an echo. This is the part people misunderstand most. The dark night isn't a punishment, it's an invitation. The silence, the loss, the emptiness, these are the spaces through which something higher tries to reach you. The things that once defined you have to dissolve so that something new can emerge. Eckhart Tolle, whose own awakening began through a deep existential depression, described it perfectly. There is nothing that strengthens the ego more than being right. The moment you realize that you are not your thoughts, an extraordinary shift takes place. You awaken. His dark night lasted years, during which he felt his sense of self collapsing. One night he woke up with the thought, "I cannot live with myself any longer." And then the realization struck him. Who was the I that couldn't live with myself? That paradox shattered the illusion of ego and gave birth to his awakening. What happens in the dark night is that the structures of meaning you've inherited from society, family, religion, or culture disintegrate. It's like the scaffolding of your identity is torn down. Everything external that once propped you up no longer works. You're left exposed, raw, and vulnerable. But that vulnerability is the doorway to something real. Carl Jung warned that when the ego encounters the unconscious, it often feels like a descent into madness. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But the process of becoming that self involves confronting all the shadow parts you've denied, the fears, shame, desires, and wounds you've buried. The ego's job is to maintain stability, to uphold an image of who you are. When that image begins to crumble, the ego experiences panic. You may feel like you're losing your mind. You may question your sanity. In truth, what's happening is that your false self is dissolving. People often mistake this stage for depression, and indeed, it can feel like a deep existential depression. But there's a difference. Depression is stagnation. The dark night is transformation. Depression says, there's no point. The dark night says, everything you thought was the point isn't. One is paralysis, the other is the dismantling of illusion. This is why Jung said that the goal of therapy is not happiness, but wholeness. Happiness comes and goes, but wholeness is permanent. To be whole means to embrace not only your light, but your shadow. It means to integrate every aspect of yourself, even those you've rejected. During the dark night, the psyche brings everything to the surface that you've avoided. You start to see how much of your life has been driven by fear, by the need for validation, by patterns inherited from childhood or past trauma. It's humbling and painful, but it's also liberating. When you stop running from your shadow, it becomes your teacher. The key to surviving the dark night of the soul is surrender. Not in the sense of giving up, but in the sense of releasing control. You can't think your way out of it. You can't fix it with affirmations or distractions. The more you resist, the longer it lasts. The moment you stop fighting and allow yourself to feel everything, the confusion, the grief, the fear, something begins to shift. It's as if a deeper intelligence takes over. You begin to trust the process, even without understanding it. St. John of the Cross described this surrender beautifully. In the dark night of the soul, bright flows the river of God. When you can't see the way forward, it's because the light of the ego is extinguished. Only when your inner eyes adjust to the darkness do you start to perceive the subtle light of the Spirit. Surrender also means letting go of your need to be someone. During the dark night, you may feel stripped of identity. You might not know who you are anymore, and that's the point. All your roles, masks, and achievements dissolve until only awareness itself remains. You begin to realize that you were never those roles. You were the consciousness behind them. As Michael Singer writes in The Untethered Soul, eventually, you will see that the real cause of problems is not life itself, but the commotion the mind makes about life. When you stop identifying with the commotion, peace begins to emerge, even amid chaos. One of the most important realizations about the dark night is that suffering itself becomes the alchemical fire of transformation. It burns away what is false. It's through pain that the heart expands. Without it, growth would be shallow. Carl Jung referred to this process as enantiodromia, the tendency of all things to turn into their opposite. From despair arises wisdom. From emptiness arises fullness. From death arises life. He once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This is why the dark night can't be bypassed. It's not something you meditate your way out of. It's something you descend into. You must walk through the fire to be purified by it. Those who try to skip the darkness often end up trapped in spiritual bypassing, pretending to be enlightened while avoiding their own pain. But true awakening is forged in the crucible of suffering. It's not a concept, it's an initiation. When you let yourself feel fully, when you allow grief to break you open, you discover something paradoxical. At the core of your pain lies love. The heart, once shattered, becomes infinite. Eventually, after months or years of darkness, something begins to shift. It's subtle at first. A new kind of awareness arises. You start noticing beauty again. You begin to feel gratitude for things you once overlooked: the sound of rain, the warmth of sunlight, the presence of silence. This is the rebirth that follows the dark night. The old self has died, and what remains is consciousness freed from illusion. You no longer identify with your story, your wounds, or even your thoughts. You realize that life isn't happening to you, it's happening through you. Carl Jung called this stage the integration of the self, the unification of the conscious and unconscious mind. In his words, the individual who knows his own shadow is in a position to know the collective shadow. Once you face your personal darkness, you begin to see how it mirrors the collective suffering of humanity. Compassion grows naturally. People who've passed through the dark night often describe feeling more alive, more connected, and paradoxically more humble. They no longer chase external success for fulfillment because they've found an inner anchor that doesn't depend on circumstances. It's easy to talk about transformation once you're on the other side, but when you're in the middle of the dark night, it can feel endless. It's important to remember that you're not alone. Every great spiritual teacher, artist, and mystic has walked this same path. Buddha had to face Mara under the Bodhi tree. Jesus had to endure the wilderness and the cross. Jung himself went through what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, a period he described as nearly unbearable. Yet all of them emerged renewed, carrying gifts for humanity. The dark night strips you of everything that isn't authentic. It takes away your illusions, your attachments, and even your false spirituality. What's left is the essence of your being, awareness itself. That's why, paradoxically, it's the best thing that can happen to you. It doesn't just awaken you, it frees you. When you emerge from the dark night, you no longer seek meaning in possessions, approval, or achievement. You start to live from the present moment, guided not by fear or ambition, but by intuition and love. The mind becomes a servant rather than a master. And the world, which once seemed gray and meaningless, becomes luminous again. You see divinity in everything, in pain, in joy, in others, in yourself. In our modern era, more people are experiencing the dark night than ever before, not as a rare mystical event, but as a collective awakening. Depression, anxiety, and existential despair are reaching epidemic levels, not merely because the world is broken, but because humanity is outgrowing its old paradigms. The collapse of meaning many people feel today mirrors the dark night of civilization itself. Our old systems, political, religious, economic, no longer provide a sense of belonging or truth. Humanity is now being forced to confront its own shadow on a global scale. Every ecological crisis, every political divide, every personal burnout is part of the same awakening process. It's uncomfortable and chaotic because we are collectively shedding an identity that no longer fits, the ego of civilization. The invitation, as always, is the same: surrender, awaken, and remember who we really are. When the night finally ends, it doesn't explode into daylight. It dawns slowly. You realize that what you were searching for has been within you all along. The peace you were chasing was never lost. It was simply buried under layers of illusion. Ram Dass, who also went through his own dark night, once said, "The most exquisite paradox of all is that as soon as you give it all up, you can have it all." That's the essence of the dark night. When you lose everything you thought you needed, you make room for what truly matters: consciousness, compassion, and truth. The person who emerges on the other side is not the same one who entered. They are wiser, softer, more authentic. They no longer see suffering as an enemy, but as a teacher. They understand that darkness is not the opposite of light. It is the womb from which light is born. This is why the dark night of the soul is the best thing that can happen to you. It shatters illusions, dissolves false identities, and strips you down to your essence. It humbles the ego and opens the heart. It turns knowledge into wisdom and transforms fear into faith. Carl Jung summed it up perfectly when he said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." The dark night is the moment when you finally make that choice, to become consciousness itself, to awaken to the infinite within. In the end, you realize that the dark night was never darkness at all. It was grace disguised as loss. It was the hand of the divine pulling you back to yourself. It broke you not to destroy you, but to free you. And once you've passed through it, you wouldn't trade it for anything, because you understand that everything you truly are was born in that sacred silence, that terrible beauty, that transformative night of the soul.